Sit back and enjoy 2 hours of fascinating facts you didn't know. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Let's get started. Gut bacteria talk to our brain and influence our mood, energy level, appetite, memory, and personality. You basically have a second brain in your stomach. That conversation happens through nerves, hormones, immune signals, and chemical substances produced by the gut microbes themselves, including some related to serotonin and other neurotransmitters. That is why the gut is not only involved in digestion, it is also involved in how the body handles stress, sleep, and even certain cravings. It is not a coincidence that gut problems and emotional issues often show up together. That little extra flap of skin that some dogs and most cats have on their ears is called Henry's pocket. Its exact function is not fully settled, but one of the most repeated theories is that it helps pick up certain frequencies more effectively, or fine-tune the way the animal locates sounds. It is also thought that it may give the ear flap a bit more flexibility during movement. Because it often forms a deep fold, it is also a place where dirt can collect, so it sometimes catches owners' attention because they think it is a wound, a deformity, or a hidden tick. If the solar system were shrunk down to 1 millimeter, the next closest star would be about 23 feet away. Capybaras are eaten during Lent in Venezuela because the Vatican considers them fish. The custom goes back to colonial times, when clergy in the region asked for permission to eat them on abstinence days because they were semi-aquatic animals and also an important food source in the plains. The approval ended up turning them into a traditional Holy Week dish, especially in the form of salted and shredded meat. Oddly enough, it was not the only case. In other Catholic regions, similar exceptions were also made for beavers, muskrats, and even alligators. Alien abduction insurance exists. Over the years, several companies have sold joke or niche policies that promise to pay out if the insured person is abducted by aliens, impregnated by them, or even dies during an extraterrestrial invasion. The most famous was the British company Goodfellow Rebecca Ingram's Pearson, which insured thousands of people in the 1980s. The funny part is that many of these policies included absurdly strict clauses, such as requiring proof of the abduction signed by an authorized alien. In 1964, a Swedish journalist ran an experiment in which he had a chimpanzee named Peter create a series of paintings and then displayed them in an art exhibition as if they were made by Pierre Brasseur to see whether critics could tell the difference between avant-garde art and art made by a chimpanzee. Most of the critics actually fell for it. Sunflower syndrome is a rare form of photosensitive epilepsy in children. The child is drawn to the sun, which is called heliotropism, or to a bright light, waves a hand in front of the eyes to create a strobe effect, and triggers seizure activity with lapses in awareness and often a feeling of relief. A colony of wild chickens has been living under a Hollywood freeway for more than 50 years. The story most often repeated says it all started when a poultry truck overturned near the Hollywood freeway in Los Angeles and several birds escaped. Over time, they became a local oddity, to the point that neighbors began feeding them and newspapers nicknamed them the freeway chickens. There were attempts to remove and relocate them, but some of them kept showing up in the area for years. From 1928 to 1948, the 1903 Wright Flyer was displayed at the Science Museum in London because the Smithsonian Institution refused to give the Wright brothers credit for the first flight. Instead, they credited Smithsonian Secretary Samuel Langley. During World War II, it was moved away from London to protect it from the bombings. The only difference between white cheddar and yellow cheddar is the color. Yellow cheddar gets its color from natural dyes, such as annatto, which has been added for centuries to give it a richer and more consistent appearance. In terms of flavor, texture, and aging, the two can be virtually identical if they are made the same way. That is why an aged white cheddar can be much sharper than a mild yellow cheddar. What really changes the flavor is the milk, the production process, and the aging time. Grain entrapment is a real danger for farmers working with grain silos, with about 20 deaths each year attributed to it, many involving children helping their families on the farm. The doorway effect is the phenomenon in which simply walking through a doorway, whether physical or virtual, can make us forget what we were just doing. Researchers believe the brain interprets the change in surroundings as the beginning of a new mental episode, storing away previous information to prioritize what is happening in the new environment. The same phenomenon has also been observed when moving between rooms in virtual environments, suggesting that the context, rather than the doorway itself, is responsible for this curious memory lapse. Nikola Tesla claimed to have invented a death ray capable of destroying entire armies. He described the project as a defensive system that could launch particles at tremendous speeds to protect a country's borders. Although he never produced a working prototype, and there is no evidence that he ever built it, the idea attracted considerable interest from several governments and helped cement Tesla's reputation as one of the most mysterious and visionary inventors of his time. There was once a crocodilian that grew to 39 feet long. Sarcosuchus, nicknamed Supercroc, had jaws so powerful they could crush bones, which it used to hunt dinosaurs and other prey much larger than itself. It weighed about 8 tons, roughly the equivalent of 2 adult elephants, but it became extinct long before the dinosaurs did. Medieval cuisine had class-based limitations because it was believed that nobles had more refined digestive systems, and therefore required finer foods than peasants, who were expected to make do with beans and bread. Very few cookbooks were written because most people could not read, and the ones that were written did not specify temperatures or cooking times. Forks used to be common in ancient China, but they were later replaced by chopsticks. Archaeological discoveries show that the earliest forks were used mainly for cooking and serving food. Over time, chopsticks became more practical because food began to be prepared in smaller pieces, which also reduced cooking time and fuel consumption. Even so, forks never disappeared completely and continued to be used in certain culinary settings. Australian opium growers discovered mysterious circles in their fields. The culprits turned out to be wallabies that got high and hopped around in circles. The last time a train was stolen in the United States was in 1970 at the San Antonio Zoo. The zoo's small railroad was stolen overnight and remained missing for several days before it was recovered. The unusual case attracted national media attention because, unlike the famous Old West train robberies, the target was not a freight or passenger train, but a miniature locomotive used for rides inside the zoo. Research shows that experiencing chronic loneliness is as harmful to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or even worse than obesity. It is associated with a higher risk of coronary disease and stroke, and it increases our likelihood of early death by 26%. King Charles receives private income from the Duchy of Lancaster, a vast portfolio of land and properties that generates millions every year. In the 2024 to 2025 fiscal year, the duchy's surplus was about £24 million. The famous Old West gambler and gunslinger Doc Holliday was convinced he would die in a shootout with his boots on. Instead, he was lying in a hospital, dying of tuberculosis, and asked the nurse for a drink of whiskey, which she refused him. He looked at his bootless feet and said, "This is funny," and then he died. In the 1980s, DC created Hemogoblin, a villain who lasted only one issue and transmitted human immunodeficiency virus by biting people. He operated in South Africa, where he infected several superheroes. There is a period in Earth's history, from 1.8 billion to 800 million years ago, called the Boring Billion. It is called that because not much happened geologically, climatically, or evolutionarily during that time. In 2021, a newly identified species of fish was found to have the smallest adult brain of any known vertebrate. It is also the loudest known fish relative to its size. Males produce extremely loud clicking sounds to attract females during courtship, reaching remarkable sound levels for an animal only a few millimeters long, or about 1/10 of an inch. This tiny fish lives in coral reefs in the Indian Ocean and has attracted scientists' attention by combining an extremely small size with extraordinary acoustic abilities. Since 2016, elderly residents of Shanghai have been able to sue their children or family members if they do not visit them regularly, and they can have them added to the social credit system blacklist if they fail to comply. In 2014, a Florida mother started a petition asking Toys R Us to stop selling Breaking Bad action figures. In response, Bryan Cranston, the actor who played Walter White, posted on social media that he was so upset he was going to burn the Florida mother's action figure in protest. The Breaking Bad action figures were eventually pulled from store shelves. A Scottish-Canadian man named Angus McCaskill is believed to be the tallest true giant in recorded history. He stood 7 feet 9 inches tall, had an 80-inch chest, which is also a record, 44-inch shoulders, and weighed 510 pounds. During the Oklahoma land rush of 1889, the President of the United States, Benjamin Harrison, declared that on April 22, 1889, at 12 noon, the unassigned lands in Indian Territory would be opened for settlement. At the moment the land opened, which was signaled by a gunshot, 50,000 people were lined up at the starting line. American Samoans have United States passports that state they are nationals of the United States, but not United States citizens. A barbershop in Michigan encourages reading by giving children a discount if they read aloud during their haircut. China has a theme park called the Kingdom of the Little People, which is staffed by people with dwarfism. Established in 2009, the idea was to create a safe workplace for people with dwarfism, who are often marginalized in China's superstitious society. Follies are buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries, constructed as displays of extravagant wealth, typically with no practical purpose. Many were designed to resemble medieval castles, classical temples, ancient ruins, pagodas, or observation towers to enhance large gardens and estates. Although some were eventually used as pavilions or scenic overlooks, their primary purpose was to impress visitors and showcase their owners' wealth and artistic taste. Hanson's hit Mbop was originally recorded as a slower, more melancholy, doo-wop-influenced song. It was only after producer Steve Greenberg heard Beck's album Odelay that he recruited the Dust Brothers to rework the song into the version we know. Mariam Navatanzi Babirie gave birth to a total of 44 children, 38 of whom were still alive according to the most recent data. As of March 2025, her oldest child was 33 years old, and her youngest was 8. She has been a single mother since her husband abandoned the family in 2015. Her extraordinary number of births has been attributed to a rare condition called hyperovulation, which resulted in numerous multiple pregnancies, including several sets of twins, triplets, and quadruplets. Joro spiders, which are extremely large orb weavers native to Japan but introduced to America, are eating invasive pests that destroy crops, such as stink bugs, rather than becoming invasive pests themselves. Their arrival has caused alarm because of their size and the huge golden webs they can spin in gardens and forests, but so far they have not been seen to be aggressive or dangerous to people. They also eat mosquitoes and other common insects, and one reason they have spread so well is that they tolerate cold better than other similar spiders, which allows them to colonize areas where tropical species would not survive. The deepest humans have ever drilled into the Earth is 40,219 feet. This is the Kola Super Deep Borehole, which Soviet scientists began drilling for geological research. At that depth, they encountered temperatures far higher than expected, reaching nearly 356 degrees Fahrenheit, making it impossible to continue drilling. Despite its remarkable depth, the borehole penetrates only a tiny fraction of the Earth's crust. There are 56 United States Vietnam War Medal of Honor recipients who received the medal for throwing themselves onto grenades and landmines to save the lives of their comrades. Many of those awards were given posthumously, which gives an idea of how desperate and chaotic those moments in combat could be. Among the most remembered cases are soldiers and Marines who used their bodies to absorb the blast inside trenches, trails, or surrounded positions. It is one of the most repeated patterns of sacrifice among the decorations from that war. Some women can grow beards because of polycystic ovary syndrome, an endocrine disorder that can cause excessive hair growth. This hair commonly appears on the chin, upper lip, chest, or abdomen because of increased androgen activity. Not everyone with the condition experiences the same degree of hair growth, and many also have irregular menstrual cycles or difficulty ovulating. With proper diagnosis, treatments are available to help manage both the hormonal symptoms and the excess hair growth. 1816 was the year without a summer because of extremely low temperatures. People believed the sun was about to burn out because large sunspots could be seen on its surface, which spread end-of-the-world panic. In reality, the cause was Mount Tambora, the largest volcanic eruption in recorded human history. The Romans wiped themselves with a sea sponge attached to a stick that they kept in a bucket of salt water or vinegar. This tool was known as a tersorium and was found mainly in public latrines, where several people shared the same space at the same time. Some Roman latrines even had running water beneath the seats to help keep the area cleaner and make these communal restrooms function more effectively. Laborde's chameleon from Madagascar has an average lifespan of 4 to 5 months. That is shorter than the time it takes to develop as an embryo, which is 8 to 9 months. Practically its entire adult life happens at full speed. It hatches with the rainy season, grows, competes for a mate, and reproduces before dying within a matter of weeks. For much of the year, the species survives only in the form of buried eggs, waiting for the right conditions to hatch. something extremely rare among land vertebrates. The United States Senate has been elected by direct vote only since 1913. Before the ratification of the 17th Amendment, senators were chosen by state legislatures, a system that often led to political deadlocks and accusations of corruption. The reform allowed citizens to vote directly for their representatives in the Senate, increasing transparency and strengthening democratic participation in federal elections. Hershey's milk chocolate contains only about 11% cacao, while sugar, milk, and various emulsifiers make up the rest. That relatively low proportion helps explain why its flavor is much sweeter and milder than that of many European chocolates or bars with a higher cacao percentage. On top of that, Hershey developed a very distinctive flavor profile decades ago by treating the milk in a way that gives it that slightly tangy or sour taste that, for many people in the United States, is instantly recognizable. It is one of those industrial recipes that is not trying to resemble fine chocolate, but to be unmistakable to the people who grew up eating it. Despite selling 500,000 copies in its first 2 hours and earning 7 platinum certifications, Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2 albums were considered to have fallen short of sales expectations. Texas alcohol laws allow alcoholic drinks to be given away for free without a permit. An alcoholic drink is considered free if it is made available to any adult who enters an establishment and asks for one. There must be no expectation of receiving a donation, tip, or payment. There is a condition called Frigoli delusion, in which people believe that different individuals they know are actually the same person in disguise. It is a very rare delusional disorder that is often associated with neurological or psychiatric illnesses and, in some cases, brain injuries. It is named after the Italian actor Leopoldo Frigoli, who is famous for changing characters with remarkable speed on stage. It is considered one of the so-called delusional misidentification syndromes, a group of disorders involving the recognition of people. Wataru Misaka, a 5'7" point guard of Japanese descent, was the first non-white player to play in the NBA. Children in ancient China learned to write using the 1,000-character classic, a poem made up of 1,000 unique characters that covers subjects ranging from philosophy to astrology. For centuries, it was used as an elementary textbook to teach reading, calligraphy, and memorization. Although it contains exactly 1,000 different characters, many of them eventually fell out of everyday use, making it a valuable resource for studying classical Chinese and traditional education. The liquid breathing technology used in the movie The Abyss is real, and the rats used during filming were actually breathing in the scenes. The idea is based on oxygen-rich liquids called perfluorocarbons, which are capable of carrying gases into the lungs. Long before filming, experiments had already been done with animals, and the movie sequence drew on that scientific work. Even so, turning it into a safe technique for people has been far more difficult than making it work in a laboratory. A 6-year-old girl used Amazon Alexa to order a $160 dollhouse and 4 pounds of cookies. When a San Diego television station aired a news report about the incident, the words spoken during the broadcast caused Alexa devices throughout the city to attempt to order dollhouses. A grocery store in Massachusetts offered a free shuttle service to customers to take them to and from the store after it was left with fewer than 10 shopping carts. The goal was to avoid losing more carts to customers who were taking their groceries home in them and not returning them. During a filming session for the 2004 movie The Passion of the Christ, director Jan Michelini was struck by lightning twice, and minutes later, Jim Caviezel, the actor who played Jesus, was struck as well. Both survived. The oldest cat ever to give birth to 2 kittens was Kitty, at 30 years of age. She died shortly before her 32nd birthday and gave birth to a total of 218 kittens. Her case was recorded as a record because of the combination of her extraordinary longevity and her reproductive ability, something extremely unusual in domestic cats. Under normal circumstances, female cats stop reproducing much earlier or have litters less frequently as they age, making Kitty's story one of the most remarkable ever documented in the feline world. Whales cannot drink ocean water because it is salty. Whales get their water by breaking down the nutrients in their food, mainly from fat. When they accidentally drink salt water, their highly efficient kidneys filter out the salt, producing urine that is twice as salty as seawater. When the Emperor of Japan announced the country's surrender at the end of World War II, he did so using extremely formal and archaic language, comparable to an English speaker using the language of Shakespeare's time. Among the debris recovered after the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster in 2003 were containers holding worms that had been carried as part of an experiment. It was discovered that the nematode worms had survived the crash. The animals belonged to the species Caenorhabditis elegans, which is widely used in research because its biology is well studied and it shares basic cellular processes with other living things. Roofman was a burglar and fugitive who gave stolen toys to children and had a secret hideout inside a Toys R Us store at night. Inside the store, he rode a bicycle, drove remote-controlled cars across the ceiling, ate baby food, and changed employees' work schedules. He told his girlfriend and others that he had a secret government job. Water has a density anomaly up to 4 degrees Celsius, and its density actually increases. This is because colder water becomes denser before it freezes, which makes it sink. That is why ice forms at the top of lakes, insulating the rest of the body of water and therefore protecting aquatic life during severe winters. Ice-T actually invented a gang to keep real gang members away from him in high school. He said they created a fake gang, told people they were part of the Hillside Crips, and convinced everyone there were hundreds of them, so no one ever bothered him. Scallops have 200 eyes each, with 2 retinas that use curved mirrors to focus light. Those eyes line the edge of the mantle and shine with a striking blue-green color. They do not form sharp images like a human eye, but they do allow scallops to detect movement, changes in light, and the presence of predators, which is crucial for an animal that can escape by giving little bursts of motion as it rapidly opens and closes its shell. Whoopi Goldberg does not have eyebrows. In a 2022 episode of The View, Goldberg explained that she had eyebrows as a young child, but has continued removing them ever since her mother did so because she began developing bumps on her face. When Nicolas Cage proposed to Patricia Arquette, she told him to get some strange items to prove his affection. These were J.D. Salinger's autograph, a Bob's Big Boy statue, a black orchid, and a wedding dress from a hill tribe. Even though the list was meant to be impossible, he found them. There is something called star jelly, a translucent, gelatinous substance that has been found for centuries. Scientists have no idea what it is, and according to folklore, it is deposited on Earth during meteor showers. From 1969 to 1972, Ford offered its cars in a color called anti-establish mint. Roald Dahl wrote a sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in which Willy Wonka goes into space, battles aliens, and Charlie's parents suffer an overdose of rejuvenation pills. In 1977, the Ohio State University's Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence project received a powerful radio signal that appeared to come from the constellation Sagittarius and lasted 72 seconds. The signal has not been detected again since then and remains a mystery to scientists. It has been known ever since as the wow signal. The most expensive medication in the world is Hemgenix. It costs $3,500,000 for a single treatment. It is used to treat hemophilia B, a genetic blood clotting disorder. In 1893, the town of Frostproof, Florida, was named that way as a marketing strategy to convince prospective landowners that the town had never had and never would have a frost that could destroy its large, citrus-driven economy. However, just a couple of years later, a freeze destroyed most of the citrus in Frostproof. It is illegal to distribute free tobacco products in the United Kingdom unless you are a member of Parliament and do so inside the Palace of Westminster, since the royal palaces are exempt from that legislation. Ancient Rome was built largely without any urban planning. Unlike many cities founded all at once, Rome grew over centuries as a chaotic mix of alleyways, homes, temples, markets, and public buildings that kept crowding together as the population increased. That is why it had labyrinth-like neighborhoods, narrow streets, and a fairly disorderly layout compared with the Roman colonies that were later designed with much cleaner grid systems. In fact, several emperors tried to impose some order after fires and collapses, but much of the city was already an inherited puzzle. Walt Disney fired Goofy's creator for trying to start a labor union. Animator Art Babbitt was one of the leading figures in the Disney animators strike of 1941, a conflict that divided the studio for months. Although he later went on to have a successful career on other animation projects, the strike marked a turning point in labor relations within the animation industry and changed the way many studios treated their artists. In 2006, some parents were upset about a children's sound book called Elmo's Potty Time. Instead of hearing, "Uh-oh, who's got to go?" some parents heard, "Uh-oh, who wants to die?" Modern human skeletons are much lighter and more fragile than those of our ancestors. Research suggests that this is the result of the modern human's sedentary lifestyle. Before agriculture in cities, walking long distances, carrying heavy loads, hunting, and making tools required constant physical effort. Bones respond to use much like muscles do. They become stronger under pressure and movement. That is why the decline in daily physical activity has also left a quiet mark on our skeletal structure. During the opening ceremony of the new Ottawa International Airport Terminal in 1959, a United States Air Force F-104 starfighter performed a supersonic flyby, but the resulting sonic boom shattered almost all the airport's glass and caused significant structural damage, delaying the opening by another year. The returning soldier effect is a phenomenon suggesting that more baby boys are born during and immediately after wars. This pattern has been observed in several countries following major conflicts, although its causes are still being studied. Some hypotheses point to biological changes related to stress, the parents' ages, or post-war population conditions. Even so, the increase is usually small and temporary, and the birth ratio gradually returns to normal over time. Obituary writers have their own awards, called the Grimmies. They are given by the Society of Professional Obituary Writers, an organization made up of journalists and editors who specialize in writing obituaries. The name is a dark joke inspired by the word grim, and the awards recognize categories such as Best Short Obituary, Best Long Obituary, Best Piece About a Non-Famous Person, and Lifetime Achievement. Even the statuettes are shaped like gravestones, which fits the profession perfectly. Ethiopians sometimes eat raw meat during family gatherings and festive occasions. Despite the health risks, the practice is believed to have begun during times of war, when fighters hiding in the mountains could not risk lighting fires and therefore ate their meat raw. Over time, the tradition became part of Ethiopian cuisine and is now served in dishes such as kitfo and gored, prepared with fresh meat and spices. Many establishments carefully select high-quality cuts and follow special handling practices to reduce the risks associated with eating raw meat. In September of 2020, the last Blockbuster video rental store, located in Bend, Oregon, offered a 1990s-themed sleepover through Airbnb for $4 a night. Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in 1935 by two men. The original book was written as the story of how more than 100 men had recovered from alcoholism. Today, there are more than 2 million members worldwide. The first artist to sing the national anthem in his own style was Jose Feliciano at Game 5 of the 1968 World Series, and he was essentially blacklisted for his performance of the song because people found it offensive. He did not get back into Americans' good graces until he released Feliz Navidad. Long before Coca-Cola officially introduced Cherry Coke in 1986, many restaurants, drugstore soda fountains, and movie theaters served an unofficial version by adding cherry-flavored syrup to Coca-Cola. In Amazon's early days, Jeff Bezos introduced the two-pizza rule, which says that every internal team should be small enough to be fed with 2 pizzas. The reason was that a smaller team spends less time managing schedules and keeping people up to date, and more time doing what needs to get done. After Hurricane Katrina, the number of babies named Katrina dropped dramatically. 10 years later, the name Katrina was 83% less common. Naming records in the United States show that well-known disasters can influence parents' decisions for many years. In contrast, names associated with admired figures, popular characters, or positive events tend to maintain or even increase their popularity. Silver fulminate is so unstable that the weight of a falling feather could make a few milligrams explode. It also cannot be collected in larger amounts because it detonates on its own under its own weight. That is why it is often cited as one of the most sensitive explosive compounds known. The slightest friction, a brush against it, or a small increase in pressure can be enough to set it off. It is so dangerous that it has no broad practical use as an industrial explosive and is mentioned more often in laboratories and controlled chemistry demonstrations than in real-world applications. Leeches have 32 brains, 18 testicles, 10 stomachs, 5 pairs of eyes, 2 hearts, and 300 teeth in their 3-jawed mouths. Some species can consume several times their own body weight in blood during a single feeding, and then go for many months without eating again. Their saliva contains anticoagulant and anesthetic compounds that are used in modern medicine, especially in reconstructive surgery, where they help maintain blood flow to delicate tissues. In addition, there are more than 700 species of leeches, and many of them do not feed on blood at all, but instead prey on small aquatic invertebrates. In a hurdling event, athletes are not penalized for knocking over a hurdle. What matters is that the hurdle is cleared legally and that the runner stays in their lane when the event requires it. In fact, modern hurdles are designed to fall forward if they are struck, preventing serious injuries and allowing the race to continue. Even so, knocking them down usually costs speed and rhythm, so the real punishment almost always shows up on the stopwatch. Jerry Zucker, the director of Ghost in 1990, did not want Patrick Swayze or Whoopi Goldberg to audition, saying that Patrick Swayze would play that role over his dead body. However, Patrick ultimately landed the role and helped change Jerry's opinion of Whoopi Goldberg, the role for which she would win an Academy Award. Play is considered so essential to healthy development that the United Nations recognizes it as a human right for all children. That recognition was set out in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which protects rest, leisure, and participation in age-appropriate recreational activities. It is not just entertainment. In childhood, play strengthens creativity, problem-solving, social interaction, and even the ability to manage emotions and stress. The memory palace, a mnemonic technique dating back to ancient times, involves associating information with specific locations in your mind. By mentally navigating through those places, people improve their ability to remember information. Benedict Arnold's crypt was repurposed as a kindergarten classroom, and his gravestone is used as wall decor. The original tomb was located beneath a school in London built on the site of the former church of St. Mary at Lambeth, where Arnold was buried after his death in 1801. Over time, the building changed uses several times and eventually operated as a daycare, which made the gravestone's presence in the classroom even stranger. At first, the European scientists who discovered it believed that the platypus was a hoax. The platypus is a unique mammal that lays eggs, has a duck-like bill, a beaver-like tail, and otter-like feet. However, Aboriginal Australians were already aware of the animal's existence. Hannah Bego was an Irish basket maker who was sentenced to death for theft. On the day of her execution, May 4, 1763, when she was to be hanged for theft, she struck the executioner, dared him to hang her, threw her clothes into the crowd, then jumped and broke her own neck before the executioner could push her. Marie Curie donated most of the money from her Nobel Prize. She also repaid the scholarship she had received as a student as soon as she began working, and she chose not to patent the process of isolating radium so that the scientific community could continue its research without obstacles. In 1971, the Texas legislature unanimously passed a resolution honoring Albert DeSalvo, the self-confessed Boston Strangler, for his work in population control. After the vote, Representative Tom Moore Jr. admitted it was an April Fool's Day prank meant to show that they could pass laws without doing any research at all. The mortality rate among Royal Air Force bomber crews during World War II was nearly 50%. Completing a tour of duty was considered a tremendous achievement because many crews did not survive the required number of missions. In addition to facing anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters, they had to fly for hours in aircraft without adequate heating, enduring extremely cold temperatures and constant exhaustion before returning to their bases. Napalm, an incendiary mixture developed in 1942 at Harvard University, killed more Japanese people in World War II than the 2 atomic bomb blasts. Bruce Springsteen did not pay his taxes until he appeared on the cover of Time magazine in 1975. He then spent the following years paying back taxes, leaving him with only $20,000 on his 30th birthday, despite having multiple hit albums and highly successful concert tours. Around 20% of young people lack a gag reflex. This has drawn the attention of doctors and dentists because the gag reflex can vary tremendously from one person to another and does not always appear with the same intensity. In some cases, it is so weak that it barely activates during medical exams or dental treatment, while in other people, it is triggered very easily. It is also believed that factors such as age, anxiety, throat sensitivity, and even the habit of stimulating that area can greatly influence how present that reflex is. Household dust is made up of about 20 to 50% dead skin cells. The rest is usually made up of fibers from clothing and carpets, pollen, particles from outdoors, hair, insect remains, and other microscopic materials that enter through doors and windows or are carried in on clothing and shoes. Its composition varies depending on the number of people, pets, ventilation, and the surrounding environment of the home. Depression can cause blindness, which is known as conversion disorder. Neurological symptoms arise in response to stressful situations, affecting a patient's mental health or an ongoing mental health condition, such as depression. In 2001, Major League Baseball successfully voted to eliminate two of its teams, the Minnesota Twins and the Montreal Expos. However, the plan failed after the Twins were legally required to honor their stadium lease, while the Expos were purchased by the league and later relocated to Washington, District of Columbia. A fox named Rambo in Australia managed to evade 10,400 traps, 3,500 poisoned baits, 73 stakeouts, and 55 days of scent-tracking dogs in an attempt to remove him from a wildlife conservation area. A survey of 19 workers found that 70% admitted to lying on their resumes, 76% lied in their cover letters, and 80% lied during their job interviews. Starfish Prime was the largest nuclear test in space at an altitude of 250 miles, or more than 402 kilometers. It affected Hawaii, 900 miles away, with an electromagnetic pulse, damaging electrical systems, setting off burglar alarms, and disabling more than 6 satellites because of the radiation belt that lasted for months. After 5 years, traces of the electrons were still lingering in space. Approximately 98% of all mammals do not menstruate. Species with an estrus cycle reabsorb the endometrial lining at the end of an infertile cycle. Menstruation is relatively rare and occurs mainly in humans, other primates, some bats, and a few species of rodents. In most mammals, females become reproductively receptive only during estrus, and because the uterine lining is reabsorbed rather than shed, menstrual bleeding like that seen in humans does not occur. Jalapenos are less spicy because of the popularity of a special jalapeno variety that is low in heat but reliably large and glossy. That variety became attractive to the food industry because it makes it easier to produce sauces, canned nachos, and processed products with a more uniform flavor, without each batch turning out unpredictably hot. Many farmers also prefer it because it produces attractive, consistent peppers that are easy to sell. The result is that some modern jalapenos still keep the chili's fresh green aroma, but have lost part of the intense bite that many people used to associate with older jalapenos. Roman emperors were considered pharaohs in Egypt. The ancient Egyptians viewed their pharaohs as god kings. When Rome conquered Egypt, its emperors became the new pharaohs because the Egyptian religion required a divine king to function. Roman emperors referred to themselves as pharaohs only while visiting Egypt. Nero's teenage brother died at a dinner with his entire family present. Some of the guests were shocked, but Nero downplayed it by saying it was normal since he had suffered epileptic seizures since birth, so they continued the party without him. In 2018, traces of 13,000-year-old beer were discovered, marking the earliest known evidence of beer production among ancient peoples. The discovery also represents the oldest known evidence of human-made alcohol in the world. An anonymous donor gave $30 million to run a housing complex for people struggling with mental illness in Vancouver, covering operating costs for 30 years. The Heritage Building was once a psychiatric institution and has been described as a beautiful oasis in the middle of the city. The F-104 Starfighter fighter jet had such a terrible safety record that it earned the nickname the Widowmaker. In West Germany, 292 out of 916 aircraft were lost in accidents. Other countries reported similar accident rates. Gene Simmons of the band Kiss felt flattered when he found out there was a Pokemon that looked like him. It is Obstagoon, a creature with black and white makeup, a long tongue, a defiant stance, and a rock star look that strongly resembles the Kiss bassist. When fans pointed out the resemblance, Simmons reacted with humor and said it was flattering, which is fitting considering Kiss always made their theatrical image a central part of their fame. When a cartoon character pulls something out of a hidden pocket, it is known as hammer space, an imaginary extra-dimensional storage area that is instantly accessible in fiction. The name comes from the enormous mallet that many anime and cartoon characters pull out of nowhere to comically hit someone. Russia and Pluto have almost the same surface area. Pluto has 17.7 million square kilometers, while Russia has 17.3 million square kilometers. Many states allow your dog to be a witness at your wedding. Some states also allow the dog to officiate your wedding with a paw print. In practice, This usually happens during symbolic ceremonies or in places where the law does not require an authorized officiant to solemnize the marriage. Many couples include their pets as part of the celebration, dressing them in special collars or outfits, or even having them deliver the rings, making them one of the highlights of the event. A book club in California spent 28 years reading James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, beginning in 1995 and finishing in October of 2023. At first, the club read 2 pages a month, but over time it slowed down to just 1 page a month. In November, the group started the book all over again. During the 1950s and 1960s, trucks equipped with fogging machines that sprayed DDT drove through American streets to kill mosquitoes, and children would run behind the trucks to play in the thick cloud that was created. In 1972, DDT was banned in the United States. In India, angry citizens pay with 0 rupee notes in protest against government officials who ask for bribes in exchange for services that are supposed to be free. In 2007, a non-profit organization created the 0 rupee note, and thousands of bills are distributed every month. New York City is owed more than $1 billion in unpaid parking and speeding tickets. The figure came to light through an analysis by the Independent Budget Office, which reviewed years of outstanding fines and found that a huge share of the debt came from parking violations and speed or red light camera tickets. What is interesting is that the problem does not just affect forgetful drivers. There are also repeat offenders with dozens or even hundreds of accumulated tickets. In a city where fines can snowball into extra fees, vehicle immobilization, or towing, the total can grow very quickly. Woodrow Wilson is the only president of the United States who had a doctorate. He earned his PhD at Johns Hopkins before entering national politics, and for years, he was better known as an academic than as a politician. He taught at universities, wrote about government, and became president of Princeton. In fact, his background was so unusual for an American president that he remains the only occupant of the White House with a formal academic doctorate. In 1964, a General Mills employee chopped banana-flavored Circus Peanuts marshmallow candy into a bowl of Cheerios, leading to the invention of Lucky Charms cereal. Sexual parasitism occurs in anglerfish, where the much smaller male attaches himself to the body of an adult female and eventually fuses his tissues with hers until they share the same circulatory system. Over time, the male's body is reduced almost completely and remains integrated with the female mainly for reproductive purposes. In 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 crashed, killing more than 500 people. The aircraft's rear pressure bulkhead had been damaged 7 years earlier but was not repaired correctly. When it failed, the crew lost all control of the aircraft, and only 4 people survived. The handheld 20 Questions game, a toy released in 2003 and famous for its eerie level of accuracy, actually used a basic implementation of an artificial intelligence neural network. It used training data collected from users of a web browser-based version of the game that launched in 1994. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the American business magnate who built his fortune through railroads and shipping, was worth an estimated $105 million at the time of his death in 1877, the equivalent of just over $3,100 million today after adjusting for inflation. Swinging our arms while we walk makes us use less energy and walk faster than if we actually tried to keep them still. That movement is not there just out of habit or simple inertia. It helps counter the rotation of the torso and stabilize the body while the legs move forward. When a person tries to walk without moving their arms, the body has to compensate in other ways, and the metabolic effort goes up. It has even been shown that natural arm swinging improves stride rhythm and makes movement more efficient, which is why walking stiffly with your arms pinned to your sides is more awkward and less economical than it looks. Muhammad is the most popular name in the world, and by 2014, it was estimated to have been given to 150 million men and boys. Its many variants, including Muhammad, Muhammad, and Mehmet, also rank among the most common names in different countries and cultures. The name has remained popular for generations, and every year thousands of families choose it in honor of the Prophet of Islam, especially across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. People used to be able to buy flight insurance from a vending machine for just 25 cents. However, the practice stopped because of scams, including one man who tried to commit insurance fraud by placing a bomb in his mother's belongings, killing 44 people. The United States has not elected a president who is shorter than the average height in 120 years. Only 3 presidents since 1776 have been below average height. Psychologist George M. Stratton, who invented upside-down glasses, used them to demonstrate that the human brain can adapt to inverted vision. He wore them for 7 days and felt strange until the last day, when he adapted, only to take them off and then feel strange again for several hours. HMS Terror disappeared during the 1840s somewhere in northern Canada. Search expeditions from 2010 to 2014 ignored Inuit reports of a shipwreck and focused elsewhere. When Inuit ranger Sami Kogvik insisted they change course, the ship was found in less than 3 hours. Nicolas Cage spent a total of $150 million on 15 different homes, including a haunted mansion, 2 islands, a dinosaur skull, a Lamborghini, exotic pets, and a rare vintage comic book. A cat's intelligence is comparable to that of a 2-year-old child. Cats can remember the locations of objects, learn through observation, and adapt their behavior based on experience. They also recognize the voices of the people they live with, distinguish daily routines, and solve simple problems to obtain food or reach a desired location. Although they do not obey commands like dogs, various studies suggest that this difference is more closely related to their independent nature than to a lower capacity for learning. 90% of commercial goods are transported by sea. That enormous dependence exists because shipping cargo by boat is still by far the cheapest way to move huge volumes between continents. A single container ship can carry thousands of containers at once, from clothing and electronics to car parts and food. That is why when a key route like the Suez Canal is blocked or major ports become congested, the effects are felt across the entire planet. Costs rise, deliveries are delayed, and whole supply chains get thrown out of sync. In 1995, Kermit the Frog released a perfume called Amphibian. Its slogan was, "For the woman, for the frog." It was a real campaign by Jim Henson Productions, designed as a playful joke around a character already known for being an awkward and sentimental romantic. The perfume was even sold in a frog-shaped bottle, making the joke a rather rare collector's item. There has been only one fatal attack on a person by a Kodiak bear since 1921, and a bear injuring a person happens only about once every 2 years. Sports wheelchairs have angled wheels because their wider stance makes them more stable and allows for tighter, faster turns. They also have better ergonomics and accelerate more quickly than standard wheelchairs. Their design varies depending on the sport, since a wheelchair built for basketball is different from one designed for tennis or racing. In addition, they are usually made from very lightweight materials such as aluminum or carbon fiber to reduce weight as much as possible, while still providing the strength needed for fast maneuvers during competition. The flag of Haiti was created when revolutionary leader Jean-Jacques Dessalines took a French flag and tore out the white stripe. His goddaughter, Catherine Flon, stitched the blue and red stripes back together, creating the first Haitian flag. Flon is widely admired in Haiti today. In the late 1980s, American ranchers paid a fortune to become ostrich breeders, but South Africa noticed the ostrich boom in the United States and, in 1993, began supplying ostriches to the American market. This increase in supply caused ostrich prices to fall, resulting in enormous financial losses for American farmers. The state of Mississippi did not ratify the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, until 2013. And it only happened because someone watched the movie Lincoln and became curious about the amendment. Henry Heimlich was finally able to perform the Heimlich maneuver in 2016, more than 40 years after inventing it, when a fellow resident at his senior living community began choking. He was 96 years old, and although he had demonstrated the technique countless times, he had never actually used it in a real-life emergency until then. In February of 1941, James O. Richardson was fired after pleading with Franklin D. Roosevelt about his bad decision to centralize the naval fleet at Pearl Harbor and warning him about the risks. Unfortunately, his warning proved correct on December 7th when the Japanese attacked and sank the fleet. HBO canceled the Game of Thrones spin-off Blood Moon in 2019 after spending $30 million on the pilot episode. HBO's chief content officer explained that it was a difficult project because George R.R. Martin had written only about 8 lines of text for the period in which the series was set, so much more had to be invented. Vikings were extremely clean for their time, so much so that an English cleric claimed they bathed regularly, combed their hair, and changed their clothes often in order to seduce high-born English women with their pagan customs. Numerous bone combs, tweezers, and ear cleaners have been found. They also used razors, toothpicks, and even tiny spoons for personal hygiene. And complete grooming kits have been discovered in several burials. In some Viking towns, such as York, remains of soap and beard grooming tools were found, suggesting that taking care of one's appearance was not unusual, but a normal part of daily life. Cleopatra cost the equivalent of $350 million after adjusting for inflation, which is 3 times more than Ben-Hur. Because of its enormous cost, it was considered a box office disappointment despite being the highest-grossing film of 1963. The United States has a perpetual lease agreement for Guantanamo Bay and sends Cuba a check for around $4,500 a year, but the Cuban government has refused to accept it since 1953. However, in 1959, the check was accidentally deposited once, causing confusion. The letter E was used as a grade until the 1930s, but it was later eliminated because schools in the United States feared that students would mistake the E for excellent. Over time, the grading scale became standardized as A, B, C, D, and F, a system that is still used by thousands of schools and universities. Interestingly, the F does not stand for fail because of any specific word. It simply took the place left by the E. Even so, some school districts have adopted different grading scales or even grading systems without letter grades. The 2021 Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded for a study that found that intimate activity ending in orgasm could act as an effective nasal decongestant. According to the research, it was just as useful at relieving nasal congestion as a commercial decongestant for at least 60 minutes. Nintendo changed the famous bathhouse background in Honda's Street Fighter stage because the rising sun symbol was considered inappropriate. In later versions released for certain markets, the design was replaced with a more neutral one to avoid controversy surrounding the emblem, whose interpretation varies from country to country. Even so, the stage retained most of its original elements, and the differences between versions have become a popular detail among collectors and fans comparing the various editions of the game. Robert Cheesebro, the inventor of Vaseline, practiced the unusual habit of eating a spoonful of it every day. He credited this habit for his long life of 96 years, despite there being no scientific research to support it. Death row inmates in Japan are executed by hanging. 3 prison officials press buttons simultaneously to open the trapdoor, so it is not clear who is responsible. In addition, the officials do not know which of the 3 buttons is actually connected to the mechanism. Executions are carried out with great secrecy, and the condemned person is usually informed only a few hours beforehand. Family members and attorneys are typically notified only after the execution has already taken place, a practice that has been criticized by human rights organizations. 5% of the sugar in the United States is made from sugar beets, not sugar cane. Most of that production is concentrated in northern states such as Minnesota, North Dakota, Idaho, and Michigan, where the climate favors this crop. Unlike sugarcane, sugar beets grow underground and are processed shortly after harvest to keep them from losing sucrose, which is why the factories are usually located very close to farming areas. Linear A, the writing system used by the Minoans of Crete, has still not been deciphered. Although popular theories exist, no one really knows why earthworms come out of the ground when it rains. It was originally thought that they came up because they could drown, but that has been disproven, since earthworms can survive in water for more than 2 weeks. The leading theory right now is that they come to the surface to mate and feed. Women are 17% more likely than men to die in car accidents, and when frontal crashes are included, the injury rate is also 73% higher. Lufthansa was losing approximately 500,000 euros per hour in 2021. The company admitted in 2022 that it operated more than 18,000 empty flights during the pandemic, simply to keep its airport slots. Quebec generates 1/3 of all of Canada's electricity, and 99% of it comes from renewable sources. A bronze sword that is more than 3,000 years old was unearthed in Bavaria in such an extraordinary state of preservation that it almost still shines. It was found in a grave alongside human remains and burial objects, suggesting that it belonged to someone of high status. Its blade retains an unusual golden-green sheen, and archaeologists believe it may have been a real weapon, not just a ceremonial piece. In 2021, scientists found the fossil of a reptile that looks like a Pokémon, about the size of a pigeon, with a frog-like mouth, bat wings, large eyes, and a long tail. The fossils were 160 million years old. It was named Cinemacrops bondi, which means China, large eyes, and face. A man using the pseudonym Kirk Allen came to believe that a series of science fiction books was actually the story of his own life. He filled in the blanks with elaborate details and hallucinated himself into those settings. He was treated by Robert Lindner, who in turn became obsessed with the books. The average trained dog knows around 165 words, and some even have a vocabulary as large as that of small human children. Studies on canine cognition have shown that many dogs not only recognize basic commands, but also the names of toys, people, and specific actions. The most famous case is a border collie named Chaser, who was able to identify more than 1,000 words and distinguish objects by name with surprising accuracy. Findings like that helped reinforce the idea that dogs do not just react to tone of voice, but can also associate specific words with things in the real world. A school teacher once received a kidney transplant from a chimpanzee donor. The teacher lived for 9 months, and during the autopsy, the chimpanzee kidneys appeared perfectly healthy, with no signs of rejection. The procedure was part of the early attempts at xenotransplantation, when the shortage of donor organs led doctors to explore unconventional alternatives. Those experiments provided valuable information about immune compatibility and helped lay the groundwork for research that would drive new advances in transplantation decades later. Paricutin is a volcano in Mexico that suddenly emerged from a farmer's field in 1943, growing to a height of about 656 feet in just 4 months. Sleeping on your side increases facial wrinkles that run perpendicular to expression lines. Constant pressure from a pillow against the skin over many years can contribute to the formation of creases that gradually become more noticeable, especially as collagen and skin elasticity decline. For that reason, some specialists recommend alternating sleeping positions or using pillowcases made from softer materials, although factors such as genetics, sun exposure, and smoking have a much greater impact on skin aging. Sir Isaac Newton was appointed Master of the Royal Mint in recognition of his scientific achievements, and it was intended to be a nominal job that would not require much attention. However, Newton took it personally and seriously, prosecuting counterfeiters and revaluing the coinage. Ice does not melt effectively in a microwave oven. The water molecules are held tightly together and do not vibrate enough to generate heat. Adding ice cubes to food will produce steam, which in turn helps cook the food more evenly. Until 2022, the dress code in Japan's public school system required students to dye their hair black. One student was forced to dye her naturally brown hair black and was told she had to dye it again every time her roots grew in. She also received academic penalties for not dyeing it often enough. Studies show that customers actually spend more money in restaurants that do not print dollar signs next to their menu prices. Some researchers believe that displaying prices as plain numbers causes diners to pay less attention to the cost and focus more on the dining experience or the dishes themselves. For that reason, many restaurants carefully design their menus, including the typography, the order of the items, and the placement of prices, since small details can influence purchasing decisions without most customers noticing. Arkansas state law says the name must be pronounced Arkansas and not Arkansas. The resolution, passed in 1881, stated that the correct pronunciation followed the traditional usage inherited from the French and based on the way French explorers adapted the name used by the indigenous peoples of the region. A. Milne stopped writing Winnie the Pooh books in part because he was concerned about the fame they brought to his son, Christopher Robin Milne. They later grew apart because his son resented the books and the fame they brought him. Unlike most birds, kiwis have terrible eyesight and are often prone to eye problems. As a result, they naturally depend so heavily on their other senses that some have been found to survive perfectly well in the wild for years, despite being completely blind. The United States Secret Service, which protects the President of the United States, used to be part of the Department of the Treasury. Its original mission was to stop the circulation of counterfeit money, a responsibility it still carries out today. As recently as the 1960s, information about bagels was not necessarily common knowledge. In 1960, the New York Times famously identified bagels for readers who still had no idea what they were as a donut without sugar with rigor mortis. Marvel secured the trademarks Hulk Hogan, Hulkster, and Hulkamania for 20 years, while the WWF agreed not to refer to Hogan as Incredible or Hulk ever again, nor to dress him in purple or green. Marvel also got $100 for every Hulk Hogan match and 10% of any profits made under his name. The skin on our lips and around the anus has one thing in common. Both areas are located near the transition between outer skin and inner mucous membrane. This is because the lips and the anus are found at opposite ends of the digestive tract, which begins at the mouth and ends at the rectum. As a result, these areas are more sensitive than other parts of the body, with delicate tissue, numerous nerve endings, and a protective barrier that differs from the thicker skin found on the arms and legs. A controversy erupted in 2011 when a Spanish toy company exported a breastfeeding baby doll to the United States. The doll, intended to teach girls nurturing skills, came with a cropped top that had two sensors the girls would use to imitate the act of breastfeeding. The Canadian preschool television show Whimsy's House was sued by the Jim Henson Company for copyright and trademark infringement. The Seinfeld episode called The Contest was based on a real-life bet Larry David made with a friend to see who could go the longest without masturbating. The amount of the bet is unknown, but it lasted only a few days, which resulted in David winning. In November 1989, a man with unusually bulging pants was stopped by Baltimore police because he was walking strangely. Officers discovered that he had 21 live homing pigeons stuffed inside his pants. The first mention of hallucinogenic mushrooms in Western medical literature was in 1799, when a man gathered mushrooms in London's Green Park for breakfast. After cooking them for his children, his son had bouts of moderate laughter, and his daughter suffered from vertigo. There are 17,300,000 American digital nomads, people who travel freely while working remotely using technology and the internet. Many choose to stay for weeks or months in each destination, while continuing their jobs or running online businesses. This lifestyle has led to the creation of co-working spaces, accommodations designed for remote workers, and even special digital nomad visas in various countries, intended to attract professionals who can live there temporarily and contribute to the local economy. Sutton's law in medicine is the idea of first choosing the obvious diagnosis. The law is based on an alleged interview with bank robber Willie Sutton, in which he explained that he robbed banks because that is where the money is. Condoleezza Rice, former United States Secretary of State, has been a member of the board of directors of Kiss Products since 2008. For a brief period in 2021, Hasbro, the toy company, owned Death Row Records. Cute aggression refers to the overwhelming urge to squeeze, pinch, or bite something that is extremely adorable, typically without any desire to cause harm. Psychologists believe this reaction helps the brain regulate very intense emotions so they do not become overwhelming. It is the same reason some people say things like, "I could just eat you up," when they see a puppy or a baby. As strange as it may seem, it is a common response and is not associated with any intention to hurt whatever inspires that feeling. The scientific name for brain freeze is sphenopalatine ganglioneuralgia. Even though it sounds like an extremely rare disease, it is actually used to describe the classic sharp pain that appears when something very cold suddenly touches the roof of your mouth or the back of your throat. Doctors believe that this triggers a rapid reaction involving blood vessels and the trigeminal nerve, which helps transmit pain. The funny thing is that it usually lasts only a few seconds, but it feels intense enough to make anyone put their ice cream down for a moment. The life expectancy of people with Down syndrome has increased from 25 years in 1983 to 60 years today. King Henry I of England ignored his physician's advice and died after eating too many lampreys. A raid in 2015 seized more than 100,000 tons of illicit frozen meat in China, some of it more than 40 years old. The case became so famous that the goods were nicknamed zombie meat, and they included chicken, beef, and pork smuggled in to end up in markets, restaurants, and street stalls. What made it even more disturbing was that, according to reports, some of the meat had been thawed and refrozen several times during transport. Even so, over the years there were also doubts about whether all of the most extreme claims, such as the age of some of the meat, were well documented. Lawrence Fishburne was only 14 years old when he filmed Apocalypse Now because he lied about his age to get the role. However, production took so long that he was already 18 years old by the time the movie was released. Because it had a stainless steel body, the DeLorean owner's manual recommended using gasoline to clean it. It also suggested always following the direction of the grain in the metal to avoid leaving visible marks, because the unpainted body made any scratch or stain stand out much more than usual. The finish was so particular that many owners avoided waxing the car as if it were a normal one, and some even used special pads to restore its uniform look when the steel became dull. There are only 6 full-time Skyriders in the world. Piggly Wiggly was the world's first supermarket, opening on September 11, 1916 in Memphis. One of the co-stars of the original Night of the Living Dead was a co-owner of the movie's production company, helped with the zombie makeup, and more. His wife in the movie was his business partner, and his zombie daughter was actually his real-life daughter. A garden path sentence is a grammatically correct sentence that begins in such a way that the reader's most likely interpretation turns out to be incorrect. One example is, the complex houses married and single soldiers and their families. Teller of the duo Penn and Teller legally changed his birth name to simply Teller. He is one of the few people who has a United States passport with only one name. The Olympic Village that housed athletes for the 1980 Olympic Games was actually a prison. Funding for the housing complex was approved only because it could be used for another purpose after the Games ended, so it was converted into a federal correctional institution. Frank Sinatra was contractually entitled to receive the first offer for the role of John McClane in Die Hard. Crown Royal whiskey was created in 1936 specifically to honor King George VI as the first reigning monarch to cross the Atlantic and visit Canada. The popular whiskey was not available outside Canada until 1964. Labadee is a private beach resort owned by Royal Caribbean in Haiti, surrounded by a 30-foot wall with armed guards stationed on both sides to separate it from the rest of the country. Tourists arrive at a port connected to the resort and never venture beyond its boundaries. There were 30 married astronauts during the Gemini and Apollo programs. All but 7 of those marriages ended in divorce. Every book published in the United Kingdom and Ireland must have a copy stored in the British Library. It receives around 8,000 new books every day, adds 6 miles of new shelf space every year, and stores more than 200 million titles. After Salvador Dali expressed his support for the regime of Spanish dictator Franco, Pablo Picasso refused to mention Dali's name or acknowledge his existence for the rest of his life. Keanu Reeves grew up with so many entertainment industry connections that Alice Cooper was once his babysitter. The story comes from the time when Reeves was a child in Toronto and his mother, Patricia Taylor, worked as a costume designer in the rock scene. A bowler named James Blackstone once recorded a score of 299.5 in a single game. On his final shot, one pin split in half and one half remained standing. The closing song, I've Had the Time of My Life, from the movie Dirty Dancing, has been ranked as the 3rd most popular song played at funerals in the United Kingdom. Fuzzy Wuzzy soap was a discontinued product that grew fur when exposed to the air. The unusual effect was caused by tiny fibers that gradually emerged as the soap dried after use, giving it the appearance of being covered in hair. At one point, vodka sales accounted for 1/3 of Russia's national budget. During the years when the government relied most heavily on alcohol taxes, it generated enormous revenue from the production and sale of alcoholic beverages. By the late 19th century, the state vodka monopoly had become one of the Russian Empire's primary sources of funding, helping finance the government and various public projects. There is a statue of Uma Thurman's naked grandmother at the southernmost point of Sweden. The game of rock, paper, scissors dates back to the Han Dynasty from 206 before Christ to 220 after Christ and spread around the world through Japan in the early 20th century. China had similar hand games, but the Japanese version, called Junkin, established the 3 most recognizable hand signs. Its simplicity made it perfect for settling small disputes, deciding turns, or making quick decisions. And today, it is even used in tournaments where players study their opponent's patterns and gestures. The population of ancient Rome was about 1 million people, and it would not be until the early 1800s in London that the population of a European capital would once again reach 1 million. As of 1959, according to the Baseball Player's Pocket Guide, there had once been different sets of baseball rules, and the New York rules eventually prevailed over the Massachusetts rules. In 2001, an Australian hacker used a laptop and a radio transmitter to take control of a local sewage system in Queensland and set municipal wastewater into parks, rivers, and public land. He did it as revenge against the department that had rejected his job application. In 1910, the American Hippopotamus Bill was introduced in Congress, Its goal was to authorize the importation and release of hippopotamuses into the swamps of the United States, both to control an invasive species and to provide a source of meat. It had strong support, including backing from Theodore Roosevelt and the United States Department of Agriculture. The state of Mississippi did not repeal alcohol prohibition until 1966. It was the last state in the United States to do so, more than 3 decades after national prohibition ended with the ratification of the 21st Amendment in 1933. Even so, the change did not mean the whole state suddenly became permissive about drinking. For a long time, there were still dry counties, local restrictions, and fairly conservative control over alcohol sales. In fact, some parts of Mississippi still maintain much stricter rules than the average in the country. During the 1840s, people said prunes instead of cheese when having their picture taken. The word helped keep their lips more tightly closed, which worked better with the long exposure times of early cameras. Back then, taking a photograph could take several seconds or even minutes, so remaining perfectly still and maintaining a steady expression was far more important than smiling. Planet 9 is a hypothetical 9th planet in the outer region of our solar system. The planet has not been directly observed, but its gravitational effects could explain the unusual orbits of bodies beyond Neptune, which orbit the Sun as a single clustered group. Josh Pillow, a 19-year-old, received a 6-year prison sentence for making threats while playing the online game RuneScape. When Larry Ellison divorced his wife Nancy in 1978, she gave up any claim to his new company for just $500. That company was Oracle, the database company, and it eventually made Ellison the 8th richest person in the world, with a fortune of $130 billion. Despite publicly denouncing the film adaptation of his novel I Spit on Your Graves, Boris Vian attended the movie's premiere in 1959. A few minutes into the screening, he stood up and began shouting his disapproval of it, at which point he suddenly collapsed and died. Julius Caesar was once kidnapped by pirates and demanded that they increase the amount of his ransom. After regaining his freedom, he organized an expedition to capture them, fulfilling the promise he had made to them during his captivity. Actress Katherine Russell has missed only 4 performances of the off-Broadway play Perfect Crime to attend her siblings' weddings since the show opened in 1987. She holds the world record for the most performances of the same role in a play, with more than 13,800 performances. A young man once pinched his nose and closed his mouth to hold back a powerful sneeze, leaving him barely able to speak or swallow and in considerable pain. Air bubbles spread into the deep tissues and muscles of his chest, and it took him 7 days to recover in the hospital. A Penn and Teller game went unreleased because the developer went bankrupt after overproducing copies of a Goofy game. Benjamin Franklin owned slaves for much of his life, but later changed his position. After a friend took him to visit a school for children, he wrote that the lack of opportunity and slavery, not any supposed natural inferiority, were the true causes of inequality. Over time, he became a critic of slavery and even asked Congress to work toward ending it. The Hollywood Walk of Fame has never removed a star, and every star placement becomes a registered historic landmark. Although some stars have been damaged by accidents or vandalism, the organization responsible always restores or replaces them in the same location. Receiving a star requires more than just being famous. In addition to a selection process, the honoree must accept the recognition and pay a fee that helps cover the installation and maintenance of the Walk of Fame, which attracts millions of visitors every year. Film composer John Williams is the living person with the most Oscar nominations, with 54 nominations. He is also the first person to be nominated across 7 consecutive decades. When the president of Anheuser-Busch, Gussie Busch, bought the St. Louis Cardinals, he tried to name their baseball stadium Budweiser Stadium, but he was denied because of baseball's alcohol advertising rules. In response, he named it Busch Stadium and launched the first Busch-branded beer 2 years later. A couple bought a house in a suburb of Edmonton in 1974 after hearing a real estate agent talk about a possible train line. The 8-mile light rail line connecting their community to downtown in 30 minutes finally opened in 2023. The Golden Rule: treating others the way you want to be treated can be found in an ancient Egyptian story called The Eloquent Peasant, which dates back to Egypt's Middle Kingdom from about 2040 to 1650 before Christ. Very similar ideas also appeared centuries later in the traditions of China, India, Persia, Greece, and several major religions, making it one of the most universal ethical principles in history. Despite emerging in cultures separated by great distances, its basic message has remained remarkably similar. Only the special editions of the original Star Wars trilogy were submitted to the National Film Registry, even though the Library of Congress wanted the originals because George Lucas hates those versions. In fact, he delayed submitting A New Hope to the registry until the special edition had been made. The Chicago Cubs' 2016 World Series rings include an engraving of the infamous Billy Goat, which was denied entry during the 1945 World Series, prompting its owner to place a curse on the team. When Komodo dragons attack smaller prey such as deer and pigs, 70% of the prey dies within minutes, 20% dies within 4 hours from blood loss, and only 10% survives. Radon gas, which is invisible and odorless, is the second leading cause of lung cancer, killing 21,000 people every year in the United States. Despite its dangers and the availability of simple testing methods, a lack of regulations and public awareness means that many homes are never tested, exposing countless people to this silent killer. Yellowstone National Park sits on top of a caldera, which is a volcano that erupts with such force and immediacy that everything around it collapses into the hole created. So people vacation inside the top of a volcano, but it looks flat rather than like a normal shield volcano. Stainless steel is not stain-proof, but it stains less than other alloys. Its resistance comes from chromium, which forms a thin protective layer on the surface when it comes into contact with oxygen. If that layer is damaged, it can naturally regenerate as long as oxygen is available. That is why this material is widely used in kitchen utensils, hospitals, medical equipment, buildings, and boats, where resistance to corrosion is especially important. The first vacuum cleaners were horse-drawn. They were so large that 6 people, not counting the horse, were needed to operate them. Shrapnel is named after Lieutenant General Henry Shrapnel, the British artillery officer who invented the shrapnel artillery shell. The first Japanese person sent into space was Toyohiro Akiyama, known as the anti-hero of space. He was not trained as an astronaut, scientist, or engineer, and spent his time in space craving cigarettes. He was actually a journalist for the TBS network, which financed his trip to the Mir space station in 1990 as part of a massive television event. During the mission, he broadcast live reports from orbit, but space sickness hit him so hard that he ended up becoming famous not for looking heroic, but for seeming uncomfortable, exhausted, and completely out of his element. People around the world are ingesting up to 5 grams, or about the weight of a credit card, of microplastics every week through drinking water. These particles can also enter the body through food, sea salt, seafood, and even the air we breathe. Some are so small that they cannot be seen with the naked eye, and come from the wear and tear of packaging, synthetic clothing, tires, and other plastic products that break down over time. John Wycliffe's body was exhumed and burned at the stake for heresy 44 years after his death. His ashes were thrown into the River Swift as a symbolic punishment even after he was dead. Wycliffe had criticized the wealth of the church, argued that the Bible should be available in the language of the people, and his ideas influenced the Lollards, a religious movement that was persecuted in England for decades. There is a 2009 Folgers television commercial called Coming Home that many viewers gave an unofficial nickname because they perceived unexpected chemistry between the main characters, who were brother and sister. The commercial inspired numerous parodies, fan fiction, and even an extended fan-made version on YouTube. Ken Smith lived as a hermit in the Scottish Highlands. After 40 years of isolation, he traveled to Glasgow to attend the premiere of a film made about his life as a hermit. In 1986, a group of heavy metal singers organized an event called Hear and Aid to raise money for Africa. It was organized by Ronnie James Dio and his band. Apparently, it happened because no one from the heavy metal scene had been invited to the more mainstream charity event called We Are the World. A 2,000-year-old sapphire ring believed to have belonged to the Roman Emperor Caligula sold for more than 500,000 British pounds in 2019. The sky blue ring also features an engraving believed to depict Caligula's fourth and final wife, Caesonia. Cher has had at least one #1 song on a Billboard chart in each of the last 7 decades. Between 17 and 20 people on the organ transplant waiting list die every day in the United States, and only a little more than half of the more than 100,000 people on that list are expected to receive an organ within 5 years. As a gas giant, Saturn does not have a true surface. The planet is made up mostly of gases and liquids deep below. While a spacecraft could not land on Saturn, it also would not be able to fly through it. The extreme pressures and temperatures would vaporize any spacecraft that tried to travel into the planet's interior. The fact that the moon looks huge when it is near the horizon is a trick our brains play on us. In fact, the illusion can be erased by bending over and looking at it through your legs, or by standing on your head, and no one is completely sure why. The Niels Bohr gunslinger effect shows that in many competitive actions, such as two Old West gunfighters drawing their guns, the person who reacts acts faster than the person who moves first. The first recorded hack in history happened in 1903, while Guglielmo Marconi was publicly demonstrating his new secure wireless telegraph. Rival inventor Neville Maskelyne managed to transmit rude poems to the receiver, accusing Marconi of deceiving the public. Ruth Handler, the creator of the Barbie doll, came up with the idea after watching her daughter Barbara play with paper dolls and give them adult roles, at a time when most dolls on the market were babies. The 1987 Degrassi Junior High episode, It's Late, which dealt with a teenage girl becoming pregnant, was withheld from regular broadcast by the BBC in the United Kingdom. The episode later won an International Emmy Award, and the teenager's baby was named Emma on the show in honor of the award. On 3 occasions between 1922 and 1933, the Coca-Cola Company was offered the opportunity to buy the Pepsi-Cola Company, but it turned down the offer each time. The Earth's magnetic poles naturally reverse their polarity throughout the planet's history, although they do not follow a fixed schedule. Sometimes, hundreds of thousands of years pass between reversals, while at other times, the interval has been much longer. These reversals are recorded in volcanic rocks as they cool, allowing scientists to reconstruct the history of Earth's magnetic field. The process happens very slowly, can take thousands of years, and does not mean that the geographic poles change places. In a 1960 BBC play, Sean Connery and Richard Pascoe shared the first kiss between two men in television history. It happened in Colombe, a live television adaptation of Jean Anouilh's play, broadcast before Connery was James Bond. The scene was not presented as some huge publicity scandal, but simply as a natural part of the drama, which was something very bold for the time. A single teenage girl once won the Texas State Track and Field Championship all by herself in 2008. Bonnie Richardson scored so many points in individual events that no other school could catch her in the team standings, even though she was the only athlete from a high school with just 59 students. She did it again in 2009. More than 40% of roads in the United States are in poor or mediocre condition. The assessment of bridges, airports, and water infrastructure is similar. Behind those numbers are very everyday problems: potholes, old pipes, congestion, bridges waiting for maintenance, and water systems that still depend on parts installed decades ago. The American Society of Civil Engineers regularly gives the country's infrastructure low grades and warns that failing to repair it in time ends up costing far more than maintaining it before it breaks down. Infamous Manson family follower Leslie Van Houten was granted parole in July 2023 after spending 53 years in prison. Patricia Krenwinkel and Tex Watson are still seeking parole. Global water demand is expected to exceed supply by 40% by the year 2030, and 11 major cities are expected to be hit the hardest. The problem is not only that less water will be available, but that many of those large cities already depend on overdrawn aquifers, increasingly irregular rainfall, and distribution systems that waste enormous amounts before the water ever reaches people. In several cases, the threat is not running completely dry overnight, but slipping into a routine of rationing, frequent outages, sinking ground, and brutal pressure on food, energy, and sanitation. There is a molecule called miraculin that changes your taste buds and makes things that are normally sour taste sweet. In fact, you can buy tablets made from so-called miracle fruit that produce this effect. You can literally eat an entire lemon and it will taste delicious. In Italy, killing stray cats has been illegal since 1991. Stray cats in Italy have the right to live freely, are protected, and cannot be removed from their colony. The colonies are cared for by cat caretakers who are officially recognized by the authorities. Erwin Schrödinger created his famous cat experiment to show that bad interpretations of quantum theory can lead to absurd results that do not match the real world. Today, Many science communicators have embraced the absurdity of Schrödinger's cat and claim that this is how the real world actually works. Research suggests that working irregular shifts for a decade ages the brain by about 6.5 additional years. Studies have also found that constant disruptions to sleep schedules can affect memory, attention, and processing speed. Although some of these effects may improve after returning to a more regular schedule, experts recommend maintaining consistent sleep routines to reduce the long-term impact. Singer Hank Williams died less than 2 months after releasing his final single, titled "I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive." When the Steeplechase amusement park at Coney Island burned down in 1907, the park's owner put up a sign the very next day that said, "On this site will be built a bigger, better Steeplechase Park." But in reality, he kept charging admission to the burned ruins for 10 cents, which comes out to about $3 and some change in today's money. The Last Broadcast was a found-footage horror film released before the Blair Witch Project. It was estimated to have been made for $1,000 or less and went on to earn $4 million at the box office. For 358 years, mathematicians tried to solve an equation scribbled in the margins of a textbook, with a note saying there was a proof, but it was too large to fit in the margin. It is still debated today whether Fermat had a solution in 1637 or whether he wrote that only to bait other mathematicians. The man who found the solution in 1995 spent 7 years proving it, and after a flaw was pointed out in his proof, he spent another 2 years fixing it. During the panic leading up to Halley's Comet, some clever entrepreneurs sold items such as anti-comet pills, anti-comet gas masks, and anti-comet umbrellas to the public. Sometimes hair grows back differently after chemotherapy. People who had straight hair may find that it grows back curly, or vice versa, and it may even grow back a different color. For some people, these changes are temporary, while for others, they can last for many years. It is also common for the new hair to be finer or thicker at first, and it may take several months for it to return to its usual fullness as the hair follicles recover from treatment. Samuel Colt threw laughing gas parties to raise money for the manufacture of his firearms. He traveled around the United States calling himself a doctor and performing demonstrations with nitrous oxide. It has been claimed that the American television series Dallas helped speed up the fall of communist Romania. The regime allowed the show to air during the 1980s because it believed viewers would see it as anti-capitalist. Instead, the plan backfired because citizens longed for the luxurious lifestyle portrayed in the series. Soldiers were not only forbidden from entering ancient Rome, but weapons were also banned within the boundaries of the inner city. Before the 1872 photo series of A Horse in Motion, nobody knew how horses moved their legs while galloping because it was too fast to see with the naked eye. Before that, they were often painted with their legs stretched out at both ends, which is actually not part of any horse's gait. The United States adopted permanent daylight saving time in 1973. It was repealed less than a year later after public support dropped dramatically following the next winter. Many people complained that millions of children had to go to school while it was still completely dark outside, raising concerns about traffic safety. The measure had been approved during the energy crisis in an effort to reduce fuel consumption, but the criticism became so widespread that Congress decided to restore the traditional system of changing the clocks. All polar bears in Iceland are killed on sight. They are not native to the island and are dangerous because they are hungry after drifting over on ice from Greenland. It is too difficult and expensive to return them home. The 2022 DC superhero movie Batgirl became the most expensive canceled movie ever made. Warner Brothers had already spent more than $190 million to complete it, and the film was in post-production when the studio decided not to release it. A plumber once found cash and checks hidden inside a wall at Joel Osteen's megachurch in Houston. Shane Stant, the man who attacked figure skater Nancy Kerrigan, asked for his assault record to be expunged so he could join the Navy SEALs. He was 34 years old when he applied, which was already too old to qualify for the program anyway. In 2020, a restaurant in Denver, Colorado had stupid questions listed as a side dish on its menu for 38 cents, and some customers would ask stupid questions on purpose so the charge would be added to their bill. James Buchanan was the only American president who never married. He remained single throughout his life and entered the White House without an official first lady. Instead, his niece Harriet Lane fulfilled that role at many public and diplomatic events, becoming a highly admired figure in the White House. Her style and influence were so significant that several places and institutions in the United States were later named after her. For the 1981 movie Escape from New York, Snake Plissken's eye patch was suggested by Kurt Russell. He pushed hard to get the role of Snake Plissken because he was very interested in shedding his Disney image. In 1604, King James I wrote a diatribe against tobacco, in which he described smoking as a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, and dangerous to the lungs. In 1974, the passage of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act allowed women to open bank accounts, apply for credit, and take out mortgages without needing a male cosigner. The Bic Crystal Pen is the best-selling pen of all time, with more than 100 billion units sold. But it had one infamously terrible variant. The Bic Crystal for her was a pink version marketed to women that sold poorly, was publicly mocked, and ended up in the Museum of Failure. Phil Collins sang the lyrics to In the Air Tonight spontaneously. They were completely improvised, and he did not write them down until after singing them for the first time. When Emma Stone registered with the Screen Actors Guild, her real name, Emily Stone, was already taken. So she chose the name Emma in honor of Emma Bunton, better known as Baby Spice from the Spice Girls. The founder of Sony hired a blunt critic of the company's products so he could improve them. 20 years later, that man became the president of Sony. By the 1970s, the black-footed ferret had been declared extinct, only for a dog to bring one home to its owners in 1981 in Wyoming, which allowed conservationists to find the last remaining population. Walt Disney's house on Carrollwood Drive in Los Angeles was sold in 1998 and demolished. The original gates still remain, featuring a hidden Mickey design. The Journal of Forensic Sciences analyzed 400 movies and 126 fictional villains, and concluded that Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men is the most realistic villain. In 1984, Leonard Bernstein once conducted the Vienna Philharmonic without using a baton or even his hands, relying solely on his eyebrows and facial expressions. Those alone communicated everything the orchestra needed. Danish Special Forces officer Helge Meyer spent years delivering vital humanitarian aid to civilians during the Bosnian War in a 1979 Camaro armored with Kevlar plates. He earned the nickname God's Rambo because of his extraordinary bravery despite carrying no weapons. For more than 100 years, the Belgian army has had a service that has been removing an average of 250 tons of unexploded World War I and World War II ammunition every year from around Belgium. The first message ever sent over the internet was LO. They were trying to type login and tried again an hour later, naturally starting once more with the letter L, which means the first 3 letters ever typed on the internet were LOL. Marcus Persson, the billionaire creator of Minecraft, never graduated from high school. George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series contains more than 2,000 named characters, with more than 41,000 interactions among them. However, the main characters each have to keep track of an average of only about 150 other characters, which is roughly the same number of social relationships the average human brain is believed to have evolved to handle. Cyndi Lauper sang a parody of her 1985 song The Goonies Are Good Enough for the premiere of Bob's Burgers Season 2, which aired in 2012. The episode is a parody of The Goonies. She said her son really wanted her to do it because he loves the show and kept pushing her to go through with it. Prince had an enormous vault of unreleased songs and fully completed music videos. Britney Spears' 2003 song Toxic was written about a well-mannered Irish veterinarian named Noel Fitzpatrick. Nicaraguan Sign Language is a sign language that deaf children in Nicaragua developed spontaneously during the 1980s. Linguists find it especially interesting because it is believed to be an example of the birth of a completely new language unrelated to any other. Nintendo actually gave Game Informer a sarcastic certificate in response to the magazine's negative review of Mario Party 1 and 2. Po was the only bilingual Teletubby. She was played by Pui Fan Lee and occasionally spoke Cantonese on the show. Those brief expressions were naturally included as a nod to linguistic and cultural diversity, because the series was created for young children around the world. The creators wanted the language to be simple and supported by gestures, music, and repetition, allowing the show to air successfully in dozens of countries without losing much of its original appeal. Measles destroys the memory of your immune system. Most of the deaths are actually caused by other secondary infections. Researchers have described this effect as a kind of immune amnesia. because the virus can erase part of the protection the body had built up against illnesses it had already fought off or had been prepared for. That leaves the person more vulnerable for months and even years to pneumonia, severe diarrhea, and other infections that, under normal circumstances, might not have been so dangerous. That is why measles is not only concerning because of the fever or the rash. It can leave the immune system far more defenseless after the infection itself seems to be over. In the late 1880s, many farmers in the American Midwest believed that powerful vibrations in the air helped form rain clouds. They thought it worked much like shaking the branches of a wet tree. This led many of them to detonate dynamite high in the air in an attempt to bring rain to their crops. Saint Valentine is also the patron saint of epilepsy. In medieval Christian tradition, he was invoked not only for matters of love, but also against fainting and seizures, which is why in some places, epilepsy was even called Saint Valentine's illness. As with many ancient saints, his figure ended up gathering very different patronages over the centuries, blending religious devotion, popular legend, and local customs that had little to do with one another. In 1977, East Germany and Vietnam reached an agreement under which, in exchange for technical assistance and expertise for the project, Vietnam would plant coffee and provide East Germany with half of the harvest. However, by the time the coffee trees had matured enough to produce a crop, East Germany had already collapsed. 23% of the students at Mississippi University for Women are men. The school never changed its name, despite having been coeducational for more than 40 years. The university began admitting men in the 1980s and has kept its name because of tradition and historical identity. It also offers academic programs open to all students and continues to be recognized for its strong focus on nursing, education, health sciences, and the arts. Tickets for the first Super Bowl cost only $12, which comes out to about $106 today when adjusted for inflation. Even so, the stadium did not completely sell out. The 1967 game between the Packers and the Chiefs left thousands of seats empty. At the time, the name Super Bowl was not even officially used the way it is today, and the event was far from the massive and expensive global spectacle it eventually became. A painting by Piet Mondrian hung upside down for 76 years before anyone noticed and corrected its orientation. The mayor of High Wycombe, England, has been weighed every year since 1678 to make sure he is not getting fat at the taxpayer's expense. Alexandre Bodmer was a French ventriloquist who trained as a surgeon but was denied his diploma after making cadavers appear to speak during surgical exercises. Paul Rudd and Jeffrey Dean Morgan have co-owned Samuel's Sweet Shop in Rhinebeck, New York since 2014. They saved the candy store from closing after its previous owner, a friend of theirs, passed away. The publisher said a cheap computer chip used in the book was to blame for the problem. The Columbia Torch Lady is a co-worker of the painter hired to create Columbia's new logo. The impromptu photo session took place in her living room, and it marked the first and only time she ever worked as a model. After moving from New York to Georgia, a boy wore a Hempstead, New York shirt with the number 516 at his new school, and the school thought the shirt was a reference to marijuana. He was pulled out of class until he convinced school officials to look online for proof that his old hometown actually existed. The first iPhone could not copy and paste text until 2 years after its release. That feature arrived in 2009 with the iPhone OS 3.0 operating system, along with other things that now seem basic, such as MMS messages, voice recording, and landscape keyboard support in several apps. In its early years, Apple defended the device's simplicity, even if that meant leaving out features that were fairly standard on other phones, something that made many users complain from day one. A man filed a lawsuit in Austin, Texas, seeking $17.31 in damages from his date, who had been texting during a movie. He argued that his date's behavior was a threat to civilized society and that the money he was asking for was to reimburse him for the cost of the movie ticket. A survey found that 56% of commercial pilots admitted to having fallen asleep while flying, and 29% said they had woken up to find the other pilot asleep as well. Bernard Hill, who played Theoden in The Lord of the Rings and Captain Smith in Titanic, is the only actor to have appeared in more than one movie that won 11 Academy Awards. Sunken World War II ships are being looted from their graves because their steel is incredibly valuable. Many of those wrecks also contain metals such as bronze, brass, and copper, but steel from before the nuclear age became especially prized because it has extremely low levels of environmental radioactive contamination. That material can be useful for certain highly sensitive scientific and medical instruments, although not all experts believe that is the only reason for the looting. The worst part is that many of those ships are war graves with hundreds of sailors still inside. So dismantling them does not just erase history, it also desecrates military burial sites. Japan's population has declined by more than 5 million people since its peak of approximately 128 million in 2010. By 2025, the country had about 123 million people, and the population trend continues to decline because of low birth rates and an aging population. The Bonacon was a legendary creature with the head and body of a bull, but with horns that curved inward, making them useless for fighting. Because of that, it fled from hunters and predators by spraying burning dung as far as 2,000 feet, or about 600 meters, behind it. Two planes collided mid-air over Brocklesby, New South Wales, and then landed safely while locked together in September of 1940. Alexander Graham Bell believed people should answer the telephone by saying, "Ahoy!" while Edison proposed, "Hello," bringing the word into common use. It took Lady Gaga only 10 minutes to write each of the songs Just Dance, Poker Face, and Born This Way. Susan Weaver, better known as Sigourney Weaver, began using the name Sigourney when she was 14 years old, taking it from a minor character in The Great Gatsby. The novel Dune was rejected by at least 20 publishers before it was finally published by Chilton, the company best known for its automotive repair manuals. The tuberous bush cricket has the largest testes-to-body mass ratio in the animal kingdom. To put that into perspective, the average weight for men in the United States is about 197.6 pounds, and 14% of that would be nearly 27 pounds. People with gambling addiction experience similar amounts of dopamine when they lose as when they win. In many people with gambling disorder, the brain also responds strongly when they are close to winning or believe that the next bet will change their luck. That anticipation keeps the urge to keep gambling alive even after a long losing streak, which is why researchers believe the anticipation of a reward can be just as powerful as the reward itself. Our brain is constantly eating itself. This process is called phagocytosis, in which cells surround and consume smaller cells or molecules to remove them from the system. In the brain, the cells doing most of this work are microglia, cleanup cells that remove waste, damaged neuron debris, and connections that are no longer used. Thanks to this constant pruning, the nervous system can maintain a certain level of order and adjust its circuits over time. When this process fails or gets out of control, it has also been linked to neurodegenerative diseases and problems involving brain inflammation. The average human heart beats about 100,000 times a day and pumps more than 528 gallons of blood throughout the body every day. Over an average lifetime, it can beat more than 2,500,000,000 times without stopping. In addition, an adult's blood vessels, if stretched out in a straight line, would extend for about 62,000 miles, enough to wrap around the Earth more than twice. All of this work happens continuously, even while we sleep. Dennis Rader, the serial killer known as BTK, worked for ADT Security Services from 1974 to 1988. During that time, he installed security systems as part of his job, often for homeowners who were worried about the BTK murders. Castoreum is secreted by beavers to mark their territory and waterproof their fur. The Food and Drug Administration classifies castoreum as a natural flavoring because it comes from a natural source, and it may be used as a food additive. The Apollo 12 astronauts secretly brought a camera timer on the space mission. The two who landed on the moon planned to take a photo of themselves with both of them in it to confuse people back on Earth, but the plan failed when they could not find the timer. David Bowie was so convinced of the commercial unviability of his album Low that, after its release, he went on tour as Iggy Pop's keyboardist instead of promoting the new record. Lee Harvey Oswald's mother sometimes went to Dealey Plaza to sell her autograph for $5. Fleetwood Mac had one of the best-selling albums of 2022, even though it was released in 1977. There is something called the Eddie Murphy Rule in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, which prohibits secretly disclosing manipulated market information in order to corner a market by using false information. Rope can be braided to the left or to the right, commonly known as S-twist or Z-twist, and each form gives the rope different properties. Carrie Fisher's ashes were buried in an urn shaped like a Prozac pill. Marlon Brando, who is a technology enthusiast and a master of 1990s Photoshop, loved joking around by editing photos of his friends into random places. Brando was one of the early users of Cosa After Effects, the post-production program used for green screens and other visual effects work that was eventually sold to Adobe. In the United States, kindergarten is mandatory in only 19 states and Washington, District of Columbia. In the rest of the country, compulsory education usually begins in first grade or depends on state law. Even where it is not legally required, most families enroll their children in kindergarten because that year helps develop basic reading, writing, math, and social skills that make the transition to elementary school easier. The movie Paranormal Activity had a total budget of $215,000. It went on to make $193 million worldwide at the box office. Superfetation is a rare event in which a person becomes pregnant for a second time while already pregnant. Very few cases have been documented in humans because the hormonal changes of a normal pregnancy prevent another ovulation. When it does occur, the fetuses have different gestational ages, meaning one may be conceived days or even weeks after the other. This phenomenon is much more common in some animal species than it is in humans. The largest piece of fossilized dinosaur poop ever discovered measures more than 12 inches long and has a volume of more than 2 quarts, and it is believed to have belonged to a Tyrannosaurus rex. Paleontologists consider it especially valuable because it preserves fragments of crushed bone inside it, offering a direct clue to the animal's diet and the strength of its digestive system. This kind of fossil, called a coprolite, can reveal details that bones alone do not show, such as what a predator ate, how often it fed, and how it processed its prey. Michael Jackson created an entire soundtrack for the 25 adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but refused to release it after he was denied the role of Willy Wonka. As of October 2022, Norway was spending $127,671 per inmate per year, which is more than the United States average of $25,000. In 2003, 2 Australian teenagers spent 22 hours in a tree above rising floodwaters after a crocodile killed their friend and showed them the body. The 13-foot-long crocodile stalked them beneath a tree throughout the night and for most of the following morning before they were finally rescued by helicopter. The classic Chinese takeout box was originally designed to hold oysters and, later, honey. The earliest patents date to the late 1800s. Its association with Chinese food came with the rise of takeout in the United States after World War II. When Stephen King published Joyland in 2013, a Canadian author who had previously published a novel with the same title began receiving royalty checks because King's fans were accidentally buying her book instead. Garibaldi was an Italian general who led 1,000 volunteers in the unification of Italy. Outnumbered 90-1 and commanding only a few stolen tugboats, he managed to land in Sicily, incite the people there to revolt, and ultimately destroyed the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in less than 2 years. Sir Francis Drake was celebrated as a naval commander by the British, but known as a pirate by the Spanish. Spanish mothers warned their children that El Draco would come and take them away if they did not behave. The use of electric bicycles is increasing in Amish communities as an alternative to horse-drawn buggies. In many cases, these bicycles are accepted because they do not require a person to drive an automobile and provide a practical way to travel longer distances for work, shopping, or visiting family. The decision depends on each community, since the rules vary among Amish groups. Some allow pedal-assist electric bicycles, while others continue to prefer only traditional forms of transportation. Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, was the father of public relations. He opened the tobacco market to women by branding cigarettes as feminist torches of freedom. He died in 1995 at the age of 103. Some cities have real estate laws that legally require homeowners to disclose to any potential buyer if their house is haunted. In some parts of the United States, this obligation may arise when the home has developed a public reputation for alleged paranormal activity, even if there is no evidence that it exists. These laws are intended to prevent legal disputes if that reputation affects the property's value or a buyer's decision. For centuries, the British considered cucumbers too vile for human consumption, but their opinion changed when Queen Victoria's family began eating them. Cucumbers became so popular that a British engineer even invented a glass tube designed to straighten crooked cucumbers. From 1928 to 2016, no Republican won the presidency without Richard Nixon or a Bush on the ticket. On the set of Jaws, Spielberg invited George Lucas to see the mechanical shark, which was still being developed. Lucas stuck his head inside its mouth as a joke, and Spielberg closed it, trapping Lucas inside. They ran out of the workshop thinking they had broken the machine after finally getting him free. Even though gambling for money is illegal in Japan, many pachinko parlors take advantage of a legal loophole. Players receive special tokens instead of cash, which they then sell to outside vendors, and those vendors sell them back to the pachinko parlor. Astronomer Johannes Kepler built his mother's legal defense when she was accused of witchcraft. The 6-year trial ended with her freedom. The United States Merchant Marine had the highest casualty rate of any American service branch during World War II. Despite that, its surviving members were denied veterans benefits until 1982. The 1961 game show You're in the Picture was so badly received that it was canceled after 2 episodes. The second episode consisted entirely of the host apologizing to the audience for how bad the first episode had been. The common daegu can use tools and will spontaneously stack objects in decreasing size order, making it the first recorded animal to show these behaviors aside from apes and birds. Only 6,800 Americans died in action over the entire 8 years of the Revolutionary War. Postal codes in Ireland are so specific that every house has its own individual postal code, known as an air code. Unlike most postal code systems, it identifies not just an area or a street, but a specific address, even in rural locations where many homes do not have street numbers. It was introduced in 2015 and combines a routing key with a unique identifier, making deliveries, emergency services, and locating isolated homes much easier. When Disney bought Lucasfilm, they canceled an upcoming animated Star Wars series that starred, among others, Weird Al Yankovic. They had already completed 39 episodes, covering 2 seasons. After a Japanese balloon bomb cut power to the Hanford nuclear site of the Manhattan Project during World War II, the plan for stopping the next balloon was to fly an airplane and throw bricks at it. There is a term for the pressure sensation you feel in your ears when you are driving fast and only the rear windows are rolled down: Helmholtz resonance. It happens because air moves in and out of the car like the cabin is a giant bottle, creating low-frequency pulses that hit the ear. That is why the sound feels more like an uncomfortable vibration than normal noise. Opening a front window or the sunroof usually breaks that pattern and relieves the pressure almost immediately. The Voice of the Martyrs is a ministry that sends approximately 30,000 Bibles into North Korea by balloon every year. The Amazon River has another, much larger river running beneath it. That underground current was given the name Hamza and was identified using data from hundreds of abandoned oil wells in the Amazon basin. What is unusual is that it does not behave like a cave-style underground river, but rather like an extremely slow flow of water several miles underground, so wide that in some estimates, it far exceeds the Amazon in lateral extent, even though it carries much less water. A Land Rover commercial was banned by the Advertising Standards Authority because it featured parking sensors beeping as a Land Rover backed toward the edge of a cliff. 2 viewers had filed complaints because the sport utility vehicle's rear parking sensors were not capable of detecting cliff edges. In the United States, 80% of receipts from major retail chains contain toxic chemicals. Most of those receipts are printed on thermal paper coated with bisphenols, especially BPS, a BPA substitute that has also raised concerns because of its possible hormonal effects. The problem is not limited to stores. Cashiers, waiters, and other workers who handle receipts for hours may be far more exposed than an average customer, which is why some chains have already started switching to phenol-free receipts or digital options. In 1992, the giant gold mine in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, Canada, was destroyed by an explosion set off by an angry miner in retaliation against coworkers who crossed the picket line while the mine was on strike. During a heated argument in the Roman Senate, Julius Caesar received a letter. His fierce opponent Cato, thinking it would incriminate Caesar, had the letter read aloud. It turned out to be a love letter from Cato's own sister. During the production of the reality television show Teach, Tony Danza refused to let the producers create fake drama between him and the students. As a result, the show was canceled after 7 episodes. The movie The Shawshank Redemption was initially a box office failure, even though it eventually became hugely successful. When it was released in 1994, it did poorly in theaters, partly because it was competing with massive hits from that same year and because its title did not do much to help sell it. Its real comeback came later, thanks to word of mouth, Oscar nominations, and especially constant television airings and the home video market, where it finally found the audience it did not have in theaters. In Iceland, you cannot name your child anything you want. You may only choose a name that appears on an official list of approved Icelandic names, although it is possible to apply for permission to use a name that is not yet on the list. In 2012, 6 Italian geologists were found guilty of manslaughter for failing to predict an earthquake that killed more than 300 people. They were sentenced to 6 years in prison, but the ruling was later overturned. Some states require a $5 million insurance policy before allowing the operation of autonomous motor vehicles. Tchaikovsky received financial support from a patron who allowed him to pursue a full-time career as a composer. However, the patron stipulated that they must never meet in person. Australia's Naughtiest Home Videos was pulled off the air in the middle of its first broadcast when the network owner discovered the show and ordered it taken off the air. Iceman, a movie partially based on Ötzi the Iceman, is one of the few films to feature an extinct language in its dialogue, namely Ancient Racian. To make it as authentic as possible, the filmmakers worked with historical linguistic specialists who reconstructed the language from the limited evidence available. The story takes place more than 5,000 years ago, so great care was also taken with the clothing, tools, weapons, and customs of the period, avoiding the use of modern languages almost entirely. Walmart stores received 3 to 4 times more calls to the police than any other major big-box retail chain, such as Target. In St. Petersburg, Florida, 25% of all arrests happen at a single Walmart location, while in Granite Falls, North Carolina, 92% of shoplifting calls are attributed to one Walmart store there. Blue raspberry flavor is actually just artificial raspberry flavoring. The widespread practice of coloring it blue is credited to the ICEE brand, which wanted its signature flavors, including red cherry, to match its logo. Croatia is the smallest town in the world. The town is smaller than a football field and has a population of only 24 people. Even so, has a museum, 2 churches, and even a unique liquor called biska that cannot be found anywhere else in the world. Its medieval walls and stone streets take up only a handful of houses, yet the place still preserves traditions of its own, such as the ceremonial election of its mayor through an ancient vote carved into wood. It is also located in the region of Istria, an area famous for its truffles, wines, and tiny historic villages. Heliki, an ancient Greek city, was submerged after an earthquake and tsunami. It remained underwater in an inland lagoon for centuries before eventually filling with silt and disappearing. It is believed to have been one of the inspirations for Atlantis. It was rediscovered in 2001. In the 1979 movie, The Muppet Movie, Jim Henson spent an entire day inside a 50-gallon steel barrel submerged in a pond for Kermit's opening swamp scene. 1 in every 18 people has a third nipple, known as polyphilia. It usually appears along the so-called milk line, an embryonic strip that runs from the armpits to the groin and normally disappears before birth. Many times it is so small that it is mistaken for a mole or a birthmark. In most cases, it does not cause problems, but some people never find out they have one until a medical checkup. Akira Toriyama's main reason for turning Goku's hair blonde when he transformed into a Super Saiyan was to save work for his assistant, whose time was constantly spent filling in Goku's black hair. By leaving the hair white on the manga pages, only a few lines were needed to represent the highlights, speeding up the weekly drawing process. Over time, that practical decision became one of the most iconic transformations in anime and manga, recognizable even to people who have never watched Dragon Ball. In 2018, a school in the United Kingdom began enforcing a policy that banned all students from carrying backpacks, after 2 students and 1 staff member were injured by students carrying book bags slung over one shoulder. In protest, 1 student brought his books to school in a microwave. Some birds display self-stimulatory behavior, a behavior that has been documented by scientists in various species. It has been observed in both wild birds and birds kept under human care, and has been recorded in parrots, ducks, quail, and other species. Researchers consider it part of the normal behavioral repertoire of certain animals, and it continues to be studied to better understand their biology, reproduction, and well-being. Stephen Hawking had to be persuaded to remove all the equations from the manuscript of A Brief History of Time, except E equals mc squared, because supposedly each equation would cut the number of interested readers in half. There is a museum of failure in Sweden that showcases more than 150 failed products. It is meant to show that innovation requires taking risks and failing. In 1974, a United States Army soldier stole a Bell UH-1 helicopter and landed it on the south lawn of the White House. During the 1980s and 1990s, Nickelodeon held annual Super Toy Run events in which lucky child winners were given 5 minutes to run freely through toy stores such as Toys R Us and fill shopping carts with toys. The child got to keep everything they managed to push across the finish line before time ran out. Fractal wood burning is a hobby and side business that uses a transformer of more than 2,100 volts from a salvaged microwave to burn decorative, tree-like patterns into wood. And it has in fact killed at least 33 people in the United States since 2017, and burned many others. Japan's nuclear industry once had a mascot named Pluto-kun, a personified plutonium character that taught children that drinking plutonium is not dangerous. The character appeared in educational materials and public outreach campaigns during a time when officials were trying to build public trust in nuclear energy. Peter Farrelly, one of the Farrelly brothers, made movie 43, which won the Razzie Awards for Worst Director and Worst Picture. 5 years later, he won the Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay for Green Book.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss more interesting content. Leave your comments and click on any of these videos. See you next time.